thanks everybody for coming. This is a kind of one in the series that we've been doing for the Arctic Science Office Hours in relation to section updates for the Arctic Science section at NSF, and then also kind of talking about impacts to COVID-19. So we're starting now. But at the end, if you want to have questions, you can either do over voice or chat, or you can also private message them to me if you want to stay anonymous, and we can make sure they'll get answered as well. So some things we'll be covering, just talking about some updates we have for the section, some field season guidance, and then most of the time will be devoted to answering questions. As always, NSF has a page with more detailed information about the coronavirus pandemic. And then, as Liz mentioned before, we'll be posting this on the Arctic Collaborations YouTube page. I think as always, if you guys have any questions, please contact your program officer. We're just here to help, and we want to make sure people feel supported. So maybe we'll let everybody do some introductions first. Here's our whole Arctic staff, but maybe we'll let everyone that's here introduce themselves individually. So first of all, we have Mark Stieglitz.
Hi, I'm Mark Stieglitz. I'm a program officer in Arctic Natural Sciences.
Thanks. I saw Colleen Hafke as well.
Hi, all. Colleen Hafke. I am also a program officer in Arctic Natural Sciences with Mark.
Maybe Roberto, then Erica.
Hello, everyone. Roberto Delgado here, managing the Arctic Observing Network program and also part of the working groups for the navigating the new Arctic and long-term ecological research.
Hi, Erica Hill, and I manage the Arctic Social Sciences program.
And then I think we have Colleen Strawhacker on today too.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Hi, everyone. My name is Colleen Strawhacker. I'm one of the co-leads on the Arctic System Science program, along with Greg Anderson. Greg couldn't be here today, but I'm also working on the Navigating the New Arctic group with Roberto. So looking forward to the discussion today. Thanks for coming.
And then Alan.
Hey everyone, I'm Alan Pope. I'm a program officer for Polar Cyber Infrastructure, so sitting both in Arctic and Antarctic, and you'll hear a little bit more from me later about related polar CI opportunities.
Lisa Rome couldn't make it today, but she's our PO for polar education. That's also shared with the Antarctic section. I think we have Renee, Pat, Jen, and Frank on today. So if you guys want to go ahead.
Hi, I'm Renee Crane. I'm one of the program managers for the Arctic Research Support and Logistics program.
And I'm Pat Haggerty. I'm another program manager in the Arctic Research Support and Logistics group.
And I'm Jennifer Mercer, the third program manager in Arctic Research Support and Logistics.
And I'm Frank Rack. I'm the last in line.
I think we have Katja on today as well. Actually, no, we don't. I'm sorry, but I did see Nancy. I'm sorry, Nancy, we don't have you on this side, but if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Nancy Sung. I'm a science policy advisor, so not specifically Arctic. I work in the Antarctic as well, but great to be here. And I'll have to sign off early, but I just was looking forward to the discussion.
No, thanks so much. So now I'll pass it off to Jennifer Mercer for some staffing updates.
Thanks, Kate. We do have some upcoming staffing changes. Our section head, our longtime section head, Simon Stevenson, is retiring at the end of this week. So we're all very happy for him as he takes this next step, but I think sad and apprehensive for us because he's a great team leader for us. And then Katya Kantar, who I think Kate said is not on the line, has taken a position at the US Global Change Research Program. So she is also leaving us at the end of this week, but we work closely with USGCRP, so we're looking forward to continuing to work with Katya in her new role. So there are a couple of open job announcements. I'm gonna skip ahead and then I'll come back to the middle here, but there are a couple of open job announcements. One is for the section head position that Simon's retiring from for Arctic, and then the Antarctic section head position is also open. So you can, if you're interested in those, you can check out that link there for the application process for the section heads. In the interim, while they work to fill the Arctic Sciences section head, I will be serving as a acting section head for the next 3 months, and then Renee Crane will follow me for 3 months after that. And then the only other thing that's not on here and is public information, but we didn't include it on the slide, is that Kelly Faulkner, who is the head of or the director for the Office of Polar Programs, will be stepping out of her position August, I believe it's August 1st, late this summer, and moving over to State Department. So a lot of big changes going on for us.
Great, thanks. And then next we're gonna have Alan Pope kind of just remind some of the opportunities that are out there.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. So I'm not going to read this whole slide at you, don't worry, but I want to make sure that everyone is aware of the wide range of funding opportunities that are open to the Arctic research community, starting, of course, with our Arctic Research Opportunities Solicitation. That's going to be the core for Arctic research, as well as navigating the new Arctic. Newer opportunities like the Arctic DD-RIG, and then other broader opportunities that are open beyond just the Arctic section as well. Oh, and I forgot to mention the potential support for community hubs as well. That is central to Arctic, sorry. Other opportunities that are available broader in terms of improving participation among undergrads, students. We have the EarthCube solicitation that you've got the rest of this week, I think, to submit to that. The DCL on research coordination related to geo and AI is open more long-term, and a variety of opportunities that are available through the Harnessing the Data Revolution. All of these and more, you should be signed up for any updates or new potentially relevant solicitations. Sign up for updates via geo. And the link is on this slide. You can find out more there, and we'll work to keep the Arctic section website updated with all this information as well. Next slide, please. Right, and I wanted to touch on one particular relatively new communication, a Dear Colleague letter specifically on supporting data and sample reuse in polar research. So this DCL was motivated partly because of the limitations to fieldwork related to COVID, as well as a desire to leverage existing NSF investments in data and samples, as well as a recognition that fieldwork in the Arctic can be limiting, can be exclusionary, and to do our Arctic science, we shouldn't require people to want or need to do fieldwork to do great Arctic science. And so OPP is encouraging submission of proposals that leverage existing data, physical samples, and non-physical samples. And we aim to improve utilization of previous investments in in-situ data, while also encouraging more inclusive participation in the future. And so we want to make data more fair, that is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and also recognize the care principles for Indigenous data governance and sovereignty. So you can find out more about this on the NSF website, as well as other opportunities that are available for cyber infrastructure related proposals on that website. But just to say that this is not a new solicitation, it's highlighting opportunities available through existing solicitations. And so you can contact me or other relevant program officers with any questions that you might have.
Great, thanks so much. Now we're gonna move over to Renee to talk about some COVID.
Hi, everyone. COVID-19 remains a challenge for those people who are planning to go to the field or have visits out into the Arctic as part of their projects. We've provided here some places where you can go for information about COVID-19. NSF has a website that addresses a lot of questions researchers might have about their awards. We also provide information specific to fieldwork, and we'll be providing another update to this OPP website given here. We encourage everyone to talk with their program officer about implications for fieldwork posed by COVID-19. And our overarching objective is that everybody evaluates any visits to the Arctic with regard to whether it can be done safely. And we'll go into some more specifics. Go ahead, Kate. So the overarching concern is the health and safety of all of our program participants and preventing the spread of COVID-19 into villages and research stations. So it's really important to us to try to help researchers achieve their scientific goals that they proposed. It's just that in many cases, we're having to put off field work into future years. With that said, we are able to support a limited amount of field work. We were able to support a number of projects in 2020, and we will probably have an increased number of projects in 2021 because we've put in place protocols for quarantining, and there's more testing available than there was a year ago at this time. So we have a pretty robust set of protocols that are mentioned here that enable people to travel safely into the Arctic. We want to note that there are travel restrictions imposed by people's research institutions, as well as the state of Alaska or the country where you may want to travel. And in addition to that, there can be local and regional and tribal travel requirements as well. So if there's anything that people aren't willing to comply with or that poses too much of an issue, we want to work with people to postpone their field work into future seasons when we don't have these obstacles in front of us. Our research support and logistics contractor, Battelle Arctic Research Operators, has set up and can implement these quarantine and testing protocols. So work with your program officer, and you can also contact your regional program officer. For Alaska and ship-based work, that's Frank Rack, and for Greenland, that's Jennifer Mercer. And we can make sure that if you're trying to go to the field, we're implementing all of these protocols and that it can be done with the safety of people on the research team, as well as people who may be in nearby communities in mind. Go ahead, Kate. So we'll talk about some specific locations. I'll turn it over to Frank Rack to talk about Toolik.
Yeah, so Toolik Field Station, the University of Alaska Fairbanks Institute of Arctic Biology, been working together with Battelle ARO to establish protocols and procedures, and we had a town hall meeting on last Friday, to discuss this. There were a lot of good questions and a lot of good information sharing. There's going to be a population cap of about 100 people at Toolik this summer, and we're asking everyone to register their intention to go to Toolik so we can manage that process throughout the season, or IAB can manage that. We're also promoting the remote access support for projects that they did last year as well, as this was very successful, and it offers alternatives to research projects. Other field locations in Alaska, like Researchgov or a lot of areas where you're interacting with communities, we're working through the process of establishing similar procedures, and that will evolve as we go forward, but we're really encouraging people to conduct their research responsibly and work with communities as required to get permission prior to initiating any travel. Jen, do you want to take Greenland?
I do, thanks, Frank. So Greenland is currently closed to all incoming travelers. It's actually closed to people coming from Denmark as well, unless they have reasons to travel there, like such as working for the health ministries. So all travel that we've been arranging to maintain Summit Station or this year for upcoming research projects is negotiated on pretty much a case-by-case basis with the government of Greenland and the Greenland health authorities. So we are asking that researchers who do have upcoming field work this year in Greenland, if you have, we're still planning to support those projects and to get you to Greenland. As Renee mentioned, our contractor will facilitate the the quarantines necessary that we've negotiated and cover those costs. So we do have a 3-step quarantine and testing procedure. It involves undergoing a COVID test before you travel to New York, and then going into quarantine for 5 days. Well, on day 5 of quarantine in New York, a second COVID test occurs. We've made arrangements with the 109th Air National Guard to conduct those tests. And then the results are received. If that second test is negative, people are allowed to board the flights to Greenland, where then they then immediately go into a second quarantine in Greenland, also facilitated by the contractor. And after 5 days in quarantine in Greenland, they'll go through a third COVID test. And if that's negative, then you'll be allowed to go on and pursue your research. So everyone it does have to travel through New York. We're not supporting requests or special access through any commercial flights. Like I said, right now the flights are closed anyway. Greenland is anticipating to maintain this closure for quite some time, and certainly have pretty strict entry requirements through the summer. They have started vaccinating Greenlanders, and so, but just like everywhere in the world, access to vaccines is limited, and so they've started with the healthcare workers there as well. So there are other options if you're considering whether or not it's possible to meet all of the requirements to quarantine and get tested ahead of your research project in Greenland, or if you just feel that if you're going into a very remote community and it's maybe not a good idea and could be deferred or delayed, then please come talk to us and we'll work with the contractor to make arrangements for you. There are also options that are being explored and were used a couple of times last year to receive support from the Greenland research institutions or from our Battelle's contractor staff to help maintain instruments or service instruments or take data. So we can talk about all kinds of different options, but it's a pretty tight and rigorous procedure to get into Greenland, and we so we appreciate everybody understanding that and working with us.
Okay, great, thanks. Passing after Roberto.
Thank you, Kate. So as we close out our presentation part of the event, I just want to provide some reminders to our current awardees. First and foremost, of course, we are committed to providing greatest available flexibilities to support not only the research, but your health and safety as well. And that means we are allowing flexibilities in spending, for example, on salaries, even reporting, charging some of your travel, canceled travel, procurement requirements, closeout, and other related activities. And of course, in this time of uncertainty and evolving changes, it's really incumbent upon you and your institutions to document precisely and carefully your records and the cost documentations that have been impacted by the pandemic. Related to that, of course, if you find that there are some events and requests for no-cost extensions or supplemental funding to help meet the objectives of the award, in this current challenging time, with great justification and proper documentation, those requests will be welcome and considered. That just is a reminder to communicate with your managing program officer. And of course, as Renee mentioned, I think at the beginning, we have this up-to-date information on coronavirus listed at the bottom of the screen of the slide, www.nsf.gov/coronavirus. Next slide, please. In addition, if you're not sure who your program officer is or need to find out more administrative information about your awards, our current awardees can log into research.gov, for example, and you'll find information such as due dates for your reports, the anticipated project end dates, whether it makes sense to think about or consider a no-cost extension if you have not been able to complete the objectives under your award. And of course, your program manager, your cognizant program officer will also be listed there. So identifying who you should reach out to for additional questions that we may not be able to address today. Related, for other financials and budgetary questions, you have access to grant administration within the research.gov, so you can check your grant balances, liquidated balances, and that can help to make your plans as best as possible for the next few months. And again, we can't, I think, emphasize this enough. If you need to consider requesting supplemental funding or no cost extension to extend the period of performance for your award, start with contacting your program officer, and we'll make sure the appropriate other staff are involved, whether it's logistics folks or folks in our division of grants and agreements who can help assist with these processes. So I think that's all on the formal presentation. Just a final reminder that we are having a recognition and celebration of our section head, Simon Stevenson. And we invite you to join us in celebrating him as he retires from federal service this Friday, actually. So the slide shows that the celebration indicates that the celebration will be on March 12th, starting at 3 o'clock Eastern time. There is a registration required, and the event will be hosted by IARPIC. And so there is a link on the website showing the proper place for registering for that event. And I think we can move on to questions and answers. We have some final instructions for the remainder of the hour. To participate in this discussion period, you may either type your questions in the chat box or use the Zoom feature if you're online to indicate a raised hand icon. And then our host, Kate, will be moderating some of these questions. We'll select and read the questions that are typed into the chat box. And if you have used the raise hand function, then the host will call on you. And at that point, you can unmute yourself to ask your question verbally. For those of you who are calling in, I think there are a few. You can unmute yourself by dialing *6. And please identify yourself when you're called upon, and if appropriate, whom you're directing your question to. So thanks for your attention, and we welcome your comments and questions. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think we always like to say too, don't hesitate to reach out to any of the NSF staff. I think everyone's really here to help. So, oh, and before questions start, I think we had one more thing to say about IPAs, Jen.
Yeah, on the staffing change slide. So in addition to the 2 open section head positions, we also have 2 open IPA positions in the Arctic section. So if you're interested in joining us at NSF, please reach out to one of the program officers or to Renee or myself and talk so we can talk about opportunities there. Thanks, Kate.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, so the first question we have is from Jack Bibb. I have heard that COVID cases and vaccine rollout is going quite well in much of Alaska, but is that also true in the smaller communities?
Yeah, I can take that. Jack, as you probably know, there's a COVID website the state of Alaska maintains. I think the number was about, I don't know, it was between 8 and 15% of the state the other day anyway had been vaccinated so far. So they're doing better than most of the states in the lower 48, but there's still a long way to go. On that COVID hub site, they do have statistics for each of the regions and many of the communities so you can see how they're doing in a more specific basis.
Thanks. Now we had another question come in asking if vaccines will be mandatory for any field activities.
Renee, do you want to take that one?
Sorry, I was going to point to the New Yorker article that recently came out that talked about how well vaccinations are going in small communities because of the regional tribal health organizations in Alaska. So sorry, did you ask me to address Gibbs Killer question on the Canadian Arctic?
No,
No.
someone had asked if the vaccines will be mandatory for any field activities.
I know mandatory vaccines is something that we're talking about internally. And I think that you'll start to see that evolve across many, many venues in our lives. I think that it's going to depend on how vaccine rolls out and how the disease and the pandemic progresses. But it's something that we are considering. Mandatory might be strong, maybe in some cases that's appropriate. It might be that it's preferred or encouraged. So there are a lot of things to think about there, and it's under consideration. Jen, do you have more on that?
Yeah, I'll just add for Greenland, but thank you for that because I know you've been tracking that closely internally. But for our negotiations for entry into Greenland this year, we are at least tracking the number of people on each flight who have been vaccinated, whether it's with 1 shot or 2 shots, because that does help us convey to Greenland, the health status of the people going in. We don't necessarily collect that or share who's vaccinated, but we say, half of these people have been vaccinated. And that's been really helpful because the military has gained access to the vaccine, and we've been, while it's not mandatory for them either, they've actually been voluntarily getting vaccinated to help us negotiate these entries into Greenland as well. So it's strongly encouraged, I think, for Greenland.
Robert Hollister, you had your hand up.
Yeah, it's real. The procedures for being tested are real clear, but what's less clear is what happens if someone tests positive. And what I understand that we have to have Medevac insurance, but is the procedure then to just Medevac even if people don't have symptoms and are don't feel like they really need to be Medevaced or hospitalized? I don't know, not living in Alaska, what the alternative is.
Are you asking specifically about Alaska or a certain region?
Well, Alaska in general, but the Arctic in particular, but even Toolik Lake, it was unclear. They'll help get you to Fairbanks, but is then the project supposed to get a hotel? I don't know what even the legalities are for, being COVID positive and doing commercial stuff.
Right. So each project is basically the awards made to the academic institution, and we're facilitating your quarantine and testing before you go into the field. And we'll transport people out of the field back to Fairbanks or Anchorage. But then it's the responsibility of the institution and the project to have evacuation insurance and have a plan for how you're going to handle those kind of situations if they occur. So that was part of the protective plan process that everyone needed to fill out and submit to the state of Alaska for approval. And I'm not completely sure that process is still being supported at the state of Alaska level, but that's still the approach that you should take.
And I think part of the answer too is that it may be appropriate for someone to quarantine and then retest versus, medevacing all the way home. So Frank, you might want to chime in on that. There's discussion about that. And you raise a good point about the ethics of staying in a hotel if you're COVID positive. There are probably ways to mitigate the safety of that. But this is what we're talking about when we say, can you conduct your field work responsibly and think through all of those issues, work with your institution to have the appropriate measures in place to send healthy people to the field, or in the event someone is sick, be able to manage that situation.
Yeah, I'll just add, so what Renee said is correct. We're really supporting responsible science, and that includes all the planning required and the risk mitigation and evaluation of the risk prior to travel. Whether you can conduct your research activities safely and deal with the what if situations appropriately, or if it's more prudent to delay or defer.
Okay. The next question that we have is from Giff Miller. So any information for the Canadian Arctic?
Frank, do you have more information about Canada? I think similarly, communities are getting vaccinated, but it's.
Yeah, right now, the Canadian border's been closed continuously for a year. Most of the more remote communities like Nunavut, they really don't encourage people to travel there, and in many cases they have directives not to travel. So I think Canada, Russia, there's a lot of investigation that has to go on to determine what's possible or not. And then we're also encouraging to have direct invites from any of these communities before assuming that you can travel there and will be received well.
Okay, thanks. So the next question we have is, what is the quarantine procedure for accessing Prudhoe Bay and Nome? Is this also handled by Battelle?
Yeah, for Battelle, I mean, for projects that are being supported by Battelle ARO with logistics, the same procedures for traveling up the highway are the quarantine and the testing. And we're encouraging all NSF projects to follow a standard set of procedures to avoid any problems. And you can contact your program managers if you want to discuss it. I mean, as I said before, the key thing is to have a protective plan established, reviewed, approved by your institution, approved by the state of Alaska, and then by any of the communities that you're intending to visit.
Okay. The next question we have is regarding travel to Summit. Are any additional capacity limits or reduced flights anticipated at this point due to the quarantine requirements? Basically, she's asking, can you give us a sense of what quarantine looks like in Kangar?
Sure. So as of right now, we don't have any reduced flights or flight capacity. We have, although I think that the numbers of passengers is somewhat reduced just because of the numbers of projects that are delaying and deferring until next year. So we have a full schedule of flight periods planned out, and the first one actually started last week. So we're actually starting earlier than we normally do. And that's because the 109th didn't fly in Greenland much at all last year. They only flew in August to refuel Summit Station. And then they also did not fly during the Antarctic season this season. So they need to do some training. They have a lot of certifications that are coming up towards their expiration dates. So they need to have their recertifications done before we start the season. So we've actually started flying into Greenland. The first flight went last week. The second C-17 just went this morning. And so I think that there's probably lower numbers on the flights, but it's more because of people not going than it is because of us reducing numbers of people. We're also not reducing capacity at Summit Station. We feel that once everybody gets through this entire rigorous process and tests negative for COVID the third time, and in some cases we're doing 4 tests. That's like a side note, but it's not part of our process. It's to check a box for Danish entry requirements. But once they pass all these quarantines and tests, they're COVID free. They're considered truly COVID free. And since Greenland doesn't have any cases of COVID, it's not like once they go out in Kangar, then they would be exposed. So we're not reducing capacity at Summit Station either. And then the last part of it, what is quarantine like in Kangerlussuaq? So our contractor is adding staff to help support that. For travel, everybody's being issued PPE, so masks and gloves and hand sanitizer for travel to New York that you can then use onward for the flights to Greenland. And they're working out a plan where you will be quarantined in a dorm in the KISS facility or one of the neighboring dorms. Food will be delivered, so you don't have to go and order pizza or think you have to go to the grocery store. That's not going to happen. So they're adding somebody to cook and sending food to help alleviate the quarantine issues. And we've gotten into conversations about, well, how are you going to communicate with people in their dorm rooms? Because there, as if you know, and you've been there, there are no telephones in the dorm rooms. There are no coffee makers. So I've started asking those detailed questions. So hopefully everything will be in place before you get to Kangerlussuaq, but there will be additional staff to help meet the needs of the people in quarantine. And then obviously it's a shared facilities. And so there will be sort of rules or procedures for wiping down the toilet and the sinks and stuff after you use it. There'll be Clorox wipes available, wearing a mask when you leave your room to do that. And then I think figuring out like shower schedules or a similar process. So I don't have specific details, but we're working on details at that level to help make the quarantine in Kanger pretty bearable. And then I think that people will also be allowed, I'm not positive, but I think they may be allowed to leave their room and go outside and go for walks in certain areas. But it won't be like you can just take off for a hike or take a truck or anything like that while you're in quarantine. It'll be sort of on a set route that the town and the politi know about, that will negotiate with the town of Kangerlussuaq. So I'm not totally sure on that one, but we realize this is a big burden on people.
Thanks, Jen. The next question we have is, so many investigators have already had to reshape their project goals, scope, and timelines, and it's a daunting task. I guess, can some of the POs give a sense of how that's gone for them?
Maybe Mark or Erica or Colleen could take that one.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, we've had projects that have been delayed. Most folks are still committed to completing their projects with their goals. And they're really asking us for, how are we going to support them to do that? So I think for the most part, I haven't heard a whole lot of projects where people want to say, we want to change our goals. They want to figure out how to make it work, and that's what we're trying to do with them. If that requires supplements, we're working with them. We understand that grad students are being delayed, postdocs. So we're working with people to do as best we can to have their projects work out the way that they wanted to, the way that they proposed, the goals that they set out. And so that's where we stand right now. We haven't had a whole lot of people come and say, this is over. I just can't do this. So right now, and what we're trying to do is just to do our best to make it work. And I think that's where we are. I don't know, is there any other folks who have dealt with a lot of the field cancellations?
Yeah, I'll just chime in that, your program officers are here to help you brainstorm how to do next steps. So a lot of you have been on a number of calls, both with your science program officer and one of your, research support and logistics program officers, just so we can figure out, what the possibilities are, and what keeps you safe, keeps your science going, and trying to figure out what that means for your personnel and time. So again, please feel free to reach out to us. I know we've talked to a lot of you already, but if you're worried about it, we're here to try to figure out how to best support you.
Thanks. The next question we have is someone asking, will vaccinated individuals still be required to quarantine?
We are going to still require vaccinated individuals to go through the quarantine process because there's not yet enough data available to move away from that posture. It's just not entirely clear how much virus can be shed by people who have been vaccinated. We do work with a panel of doctors to have these discussions, and we consult, research and other materials. So I think, we'd all like to see people, basically reaching that herd immunity piece and having enough vaccinated individuals in our pool. But there's just not quite enough known yet about the efficacy. There's a small percentage of people who are not protected by the vaccine. And so we're not ready to move away from the quarantine process. We really want COVID-free individuals in the program. So I, obviously encourage everyone to get the vaccine as soon as it's available to you. And I think that will be a heavy factor in our program as we go forward.
And there's also the uncertainties about the variants.
Yeah, exactly. The different strains of the disease.
Coley, I see you have your hand up. Would you like to come up and ask a question?
Yeah, sorry, I want to come back to Peruda because this is really uncertain. Where do we get the permission to go there? I mean, if you go to the oil companies' websites, it's pretty loose. And do we need to drive it, or do we need to just fly to Peruda Bay and go, to access, or to Dead Horse actually, to access Peruda Bay? I mean, that's kind of the question number one. And do we need to quarantine, or do we need to adhere to the company's rules to access the Peruda Bay oil field? And the same question related to NOM. Okay, well, who do we ask to access for community permission? Because again, right now, if you go to the NOM webpage, I mean, it's pretty loose. I mean, they don't require the quarantine, just a test upon entry. And that's what we need to consider. I mean, sorry, just those couple questions.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the IATA travel industry website for Alaska, they reflect on the fact that even though the state health recommendations have changed, last week to be recommendations, not mandates, they still encourage everyone to be tested before you travel, follow all the procedures, file a plan for personal protection, and contact the local, the local villages and get permission, get an invite, basically. So with the oil companies, it's very hard to get information. I looked on the website. There's not information about Dead Horse or about any particular sites. So that's why we're encouraging responsible and safe research planning and activities. So, we can't determine the safest option for every single project that's out there. We can provide guidance, and basically we can assist the process with quarantines and testing to ensure that you're not going to be a vector. But there's so many different possibilities that you really got to provide that that planning at your project level and get it cleared with the university, who are the ones that are implementing the research through the NSF grant. And you've got to follow state, local, tribal, and other regulations if they exist.
So basically, if I understood correctly, I mean, there is no any additional NSF imposed regulation on top of what's either oil company or the community gives us, right?
It's basically in the terms and conditions of your award is that you're gonna follow all these procedures and legal frameworks.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we have one more question related to Greenland. Okay, in each settlement in Greenland, including Thule, requiring separate quarantine and testing, or will quarantine and testing in Kangerlussuaq cover Thule as well?
That's a really good question. Let me start with Greater Greenland, and then I'll speak about Thule separately. But as of right now, it's my understanding that going to other communities in Greenland, once you've quarantined in Kangerlussuaq, is permitted, but we would encourage you similar to Alaska, to work with the community so they know you're coming, do outreach, make sure that it's okay that you're coming there, not just show up in the community. There are people on here from our support contractor. I see Katrine's on here. I imagine the rest of several members of the Greenland team are on here. So reach out to your Battelle ARO point of contact and discuss where you're going if it's outside of Kangerlussuaq or Summit, and how they might help reach out to do some outreach and talk about what you're doing. So I would, it's not, and there are not additional quarantine requirements once you go to, like say, a Ilulissat or something after you've quarantined and been cleared in Greenland. But I think that outreach is really necessary here so that we don't offend communities because they just don't know. So those are the settlements. As far as Thule Air Base goes, they have their own quarantine requirements and procedures. And I should have said, I didn't say this at the beginning, for going to Thule, you can still travel on the 757, but we have to work out processes for quarantining ahead of time. Actually, that's not true because the quarantine's in Thule is their requirement. So they have some requirements. Again, reach out to your Battelle point of contact and or me, and we can look specifically at your project. If you're going to be going through both, I know that some projects have, like NASA had a project that they were able to negotiate a reduced quarantine or access to Thule because they had quarantined and tested in Greenland already. But I don't think that's just sort of a blanket thing. I think it was an exception. So again, we'll have to work with you on a case-by-case basis. Please reach out to your Battelle point of contact and or to me, and we can talk about it and find the answer for you, or find a, brainstorm about a solution for the process of working in different communities in Greenland. I think that answers all of the question, Kate.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Next one is also Greenland. So if someone ends up testing positive in Kanger, what happens? Is it further isolation and KISS, assuming that symptoms are not severe, or are they sent back to New York ASAP?
Also a good question. So a lot of what we do in Greenland in our management of this is basically directed by the government of Greenland and their health authorities. So if a person tests positive in Kanger and they are asymptomatic, Greenland's policy is that person should shelter in place. It probably won't be in KISS. I know that our contractor has a plan in place, and so it would probably be a different quarantine place. And there are quarantine places in Kangerlussuaq. So if they're asymptomatic, they have to quarantine. Greenland's policy, I believe, or it was, I could be misspeaking, but I believe it was quarantine for a certain number of days, and then you're free to go. Or you could possibly retest as well. We are actually standing up at our own testing facilities in Greenland that will be shared with the Greenland health authorities. So they don't have the ability to analyze test samples in Kangerlussuaq. All test samples are currently sent to Nuuk. So we are currently setting up a test facility in Kangerlussuaq to help offset the impact that we will be having with all of these people coming in. So we may have the ability to retest a person after a couple of days, see if they're, if it was a false positive or not. Those are pretty rare, but they can quarantine. If they are symptomatic, then we have to work on, I'm going to let Renee talk about this a little bit, but there is actually a requirement to get permission from the State Department for repatriation, and the embassy will have to help us do that. And that's would end up being a medevac situation. So I don't know, Renee, if you want to add to that.
No, I think that covers it. It goes back to making sure that every individual has medevac insurance, because the best option might be a commercial medevac option.
Okay. Just comment for
and
Corey,
actually the 109th cannot fly a civilian COVID positive person out of Greenland, so they wouldn't be flying you back to the US. So it would have to be a commercial medevac option. So please make sure your medevac insurance is up to date. But again, in order for us to facilitate that and the flight to come and get you, the State Department has to get involved, and the embassy has to get a waiver or special permit to have you repatriated as a COVID positive patient.
Thanks. questions. And I just wanted to highlight to Coley, I think Natalie Bowman had left a comment for you about GNOME. She said she had asked the DSNC since they own the land that her project was working on. And then Jack, did you have your hand raised? Would you like to ask your question?
I just wanted to follow up on this topic that Jen and Renee were just talking about. But I mean, it seems fairly remote, but if such a thing did happen and a person was in Kangar and quarantining and tested positive in Greenland, would that impact everyone else that was in KISS at that time? Or is it only that one individual? Or the people that were, I don't know if there's people in the roommates with them or other people on the floor or sharing the bathroom, whether they would all have to extend quarantine as well, or that hasn't been defined yet.
So Jack, we are working out a set process for that in all of the tabletop and what if scenarios. Again, we'd be able to retest people. So if that cohort, well, there won't be roommate situations, but as you know, people will be using shared facilities. And like I said, it'll be a kind of a strange, you won't have to sign up to go to the toilet, but you may have to sign up to go take a shower during a certain slot of time. So we don't have congestion in the bathrooms in windows of time, and you're in quarantine. So but there could be people that are potentially exposed then that we would need to retest after a couple of days, depending on exposure. And so that is being worked out as a process. So that particular quarantine group, we would assess that group and determine how many people need to be retested and how much longer we would need to hold them in Kangerlussuaq. Our understanding of the current situation with PCR testing is that the chances of catching a COVID positive case is significantly high after day 5 of exposure. It's not 100%, but it's significantly high. And so that would probably be the extreme, but we could retest people, right away and see if anyone else is positive, and go from there. So, but yes, that will all be assessed if we come to that situation, and we're working out those scenarios.
Okay. The next question is, could you comment on how deferred plans from 2020 and likely 2021 may impact logistics in 2021 and beyond? Are these considerations plus any supplements to awards impacting new starts?
I could take that as a start. We went into this 2021 season anticipating that we could support all of the makeup work plus the 2021 field season. And it is a stretch, but we were finding ways to do that. And then as COVID evolved throughout the fall and the holidays, we knew we were going to have to backtrack on 2021 field work as well. So I think going into 2022, we're still optimistic that we can support everything that's planned, that would be intended to go to the field at that time. We know that we might have to cut back in some other areas that might be upgrades to facilities or things like that. And we also would sacrifice the flexibility to do any add-ons for people or extended this or add a new person to a field party that was, planned to be a certain size. So it would just really reduce our flexibility to do anything extra, but we're hopeful. We haven't gone to the planning stage for 2022 yet. That usually starts in late summer and early fall, but we're hopeful that we would, be able to handle everything that will be planned for 2022 and also pushed into 2022 due to COVID. And my colleagues might have more to add to that.
I'll just add to the last part of Jack's question there. I don't think that anything is affecting new starts other than delays to field work. But as far as making awards and things, I don't think we've seen a large impact on that. I see Colleen nodding her head. I don't know if you want to make a comment or any of our other program officers to add on to what Renee said or I just added.
I can just add that it's not stopping us from making new awards, but Certainly when you're contacted by your program officer that we're planning to move forward with an award recommendation, I've certainly worked with some of my PIs to think about restructuring their budget based on the rapidly changing COVID situation. So in some cases, instead of a 3-year budget, we can kind of revise to a 4-year budget. We can think about kind of restructuring your budget if you need less travel money and more support for students to do data analysis and things like that. So it's not stopping us from making an awards, but it's just allowing us to communicate with PIs on restructuring the budget to make sure that you're best supported given the information that we have right now.
So I think that's all of the questions. I think we had a couple that were answered in chat. Jack, you still have your hand up, or is that from the last one? Hand down. All
It's leftover, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. We're just double checking. We'll make sure you're heard. So
He's just waving at us.
So maybe we'll end it there. Thank you everybody so much always for attending. We really appreciate it. And as always, please reach out if you have any questions for any of us.
And from IARPIC, thank you to everyone from NSF for joining us today. And thank you to all of you for joining as the audience and asking your questions. This was recorded and I will be posting it on the event page and on our YouTube channel, probably tomorrow, definitely by the end of the week. So you'll be able to find it there. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody.